Today we're unveiling our first permeable pavement street. As opposed to traditional concrete pavement or asphalt pavement, this actually has open spaces, as you can see, where the water is allowed to go down into the subgrade, into a rock chamber where it is the flow is reduced and the water is treated.
I understand this is one of the first of its kind here in Davenport. Right? This is the first.
It is the first.
Talk about why now.
Why here? This site, this watershed that we're standing in, is the most highly impaired watershed for bacteria in the city of Davenport. This type of practice has been proven to reduce bacteria because the water is infiltrated and cleansed through the rock chamber beneath. So the street that we had was relatively short, so it gave us a good experimental place. We have the park to the south, which is a good setting, or actually to the north, which is a good setting for our bioretention cells. And because we wanted to have something that we could easily handle and not have a whole lot of impact on the traveling public, it's a nice residential area that we could do this, and so it fit real well.
Cost, how much?
This project was estimated at about $320,000. It came in slightly under budget. As I mentioned during the conference, it was funded through the state revolving loan sponsored project funding, so it did not cost taxpayers or ratepayers any extra dollars, which is a nice thing as well.
How long did this project take to construct?
To construct, the entire construction from removal of the existing pavement to rock base, new curb and gutter on certain sections took about 20 days.
That's not bad at all.
No, it's much shorter than a traditional concrete street.
Okay. So what exactly is this street made out of?
They're called interlocking permeable concrete blocks, and I have a sample over there if you want to get a photo of that later. But basically, these blocks that we're standing on, I keep looking down, but these blocks that we're standing on are meshed together with a cable, so they're in a giant mat, and as they get set down, you can set a whole mat at one time as opposed to laying individual blocks by hand. So the installation is much faster than traditionally just, like I said, laying it by hand and stacking them all up. So the benefits are, in a traditional street pavement, if it would have rained real hard, if we get a 2 or 3 inch rain, all that water builds up in the curb and gutter, it races down the street, it picks up whatever contaminants are on the street, oil, grease, leaves, water, grass, whatever, and takes it on this particular street around the corner down to the nearest catch basin. So you get just a giant flush, rushing water down the street. As you'll see on this when we demonstrate it, the water, when you dump it on here, it just goes down. So any contaminants, pollutants that are picked up by the water go into the rock chamber where they can be removed, filtered out, and so the water that comes out into the biocells is pretty much, it's definitely clear. It may not be 100% drinkable, but then by the time it goes through the bioretention cells and out into the storm sewer, it's been slowed down, it's been filtered out, and so it's a much better product, instead of having just nasty storm water, this is a much cleaner product. So when it goes into the stream, there's no bad effects on the stream.
Hey, and you guys mentioned it also reduces the plowing and salting needs. Talk about that.
Yes. When snow lands on a street, it either melts, it'll either stay as snow, it'll melt and form ice, or both. So what happens here is, because we have open pore spaces beneath, we have a little bit of more latent heat from the ground below. So when it first starts to snow, it'll melt, and rather than melting and sticking on the concrete, it can melt and go down into the pores. So you reduce that first little bit of snow. So we don't have the ice layer underneath the pavement. So what'll happen is that'll cause us not have to apply salt, and that'll allow us to plow it less frequently. So these are what we've been told by the developers and the industry. Why we wanted to do one of our own is to make sure and confirm that. So that's one of the things we're looking for this winter.
So obviously this winter is quickly approaching, and if we see the benefits that these developers are claiming that we'll see, will this be a trend in Davenport?
I certainly hope so. I think my position with the city is we're trying to improve water quality all over town wherever we can. This is one tool that we have to do that with, and so if we can utilize this more frequently all over town, I'd be happy to do that. That'd be great.
A few more questions. You mentioned water main breaks. How will this help with water main breaks?
The repair time will be reduced. As I mentioned, if we had a break where I'm standing here, we'd have to come in here traditionally and saw cut the pavement out, remove the pavement, shut off the break, put all the backfill in, pave it, and then you're going to wait 7 to 14 days for the concrete to cure to open the street back up. With this material, you come in, you remove the material, set it aside, do your work, put the rock back in, drop the bricks back in the same day you're driving on it again. So
sounds interesting. Mm-hmm. You listed all these pros. What are the cons?
I don't know what any cons are at this time. The first experiment that we had with this, there were some difficulties cutting blocks on a radius because you're using a flat blade to cut a curve. So that's been a little bit tricky. Some of the installation when they first started was a little bit tricky because they weren't used to the installation. But it is a brick street, so it doesn't ride like asphalt, it doesn't ride completely smooth, which I think could be also a pro because it kind of slows people down, and it's I think it's pleasant to look at and it's pleasant to drive over. I've driven over it multiple times. You don't notice potholes. If you would have a pothole, you can take the brick up, put rock underneath it, fill it back up, and level the grade out. So it's one of those things that it has multiple benefits and very few negatives, if any.
This outside the box thinking creates a roadway that reduces stormwater runoff volume and treats the water to remove potential contaminants before they reach our creeks and streams. And that's a serious problem, and we've had different agencies and EPA and everyone else telling us we've got to stop allowing oil and grease and so forth to get into our streams. This innovative approach may represent the future of stormwater management as streets are reconstructed. As we reconstruct streets, and they can't be done on hills, I'm told, but flat streets, this may be the approach that's used in the future. Brian will talk a little bit more about why it may even be less expensive, because you may not have to put as many storm pipes and so forth under the streets when you build them anew, but he'll explain that. Also, they say this approach may provide the streets to last longer. In other words, the maintenance and the way they're constructed. And the old brick streets actually work pretty well. Instead of potholes, they sort of become wavy, but they settle back down. I don't know whether that's the case with these or not, but apparently it's a modern-day version. Let me also add that this process is new to Davenport, but not new in the United States. Several cities across the U.S. have been experimenting and doing this sort of permeable paving for a number of years, including Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Goshen, Indiana, Pompano, Florida, and a number of others. So the point is that it's not just a wild idea. It's something that's been tried and proven in other areas to work, and now our city engineers and city staff are bringing this new approach to Davenport to see if we can do things better. Finally, let me just take a second to thank and recognize some of the people who've been directly involved and principally responsible for this project. You're going to hear from Brian Steinman, who's our soil erosion inspector and oversees that area in the city of Davenport. Billy Fisher, who's our urban conservationist, who helped Brian draw up the plans for this. Tim Martin with King's Material back here, who supplied a lot of the materials. And Mike and Lee DeJulius with NJ Miller Construction, who constructed this. And it's to their credit that we got this far, and it's sort of a learning process, as I understand it, for everyone. But if this is going to be one of the waves of the future, obviously we want to be ahead of it. So also with us today is the alderman one of the aldermen, Second Ward Alderman Bill Edmond, who through our efforts and encouragement supported this kind of project. Again, the idea is to keep Davenport cutting edge and be flexible enough to adapt with different approaches and hopefully save the public money and build better streets in the future. And finally, put it in perspective. I got a report a while back from the Public Works Director. I'd asked him to tell us what it would cost the people of Davenport if we were able to rebuild all the streets, curbs and gutters across the city. And there's several hundred miles of them. And to put it in perspective, the cost would be $779 million, almost $1 billion, to replace this part of our infrastructure across the city. And no city can deal with that. These things have been, they cobble up over the years. All cities have tried to stay ahead of the curve, but there just hasn't been enough money coming down from states and federal government to really stay ahead of the crises facing this country and our infrastructure. But at least the city of Davenport, through kind of innovative approaches like this, are trying. So with that, I want to turn it over to Brian, who maybe will answer some more technical questions and give you a little better view. And then we're going to pour some water to show you how it doesn't flow off in, it sinks into the ground, it absorbs into the ground, basically is purified before it reaches our streams and creeks. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank everybody for coming out today. Thanks to everybody back here who helped contribute to this project. We're very excited with this new process for paving streets. We feel that it could be the future of street reconstruction and street pavement in the city of Davenport. The nice thing about this is I think innovation is kind of the key word of the day. It's an innovative product, but it's also an innovative way to pay for these types of projects. This project today didn't cost the city of Davenport any extra dollars. It was innovative funding from the state revolving loan fund. The city of Davenport borrowed money to do the West Side Sewer Diversion Tunnel project. And normally when you borrow money from the state revolving loan, you pay back interest. The state has decided to change the rules a little bit so that the interest that would be paid back normally can be used for a water quality project. So the $700 and some odd thousand that we would have been paying back in interest, we were able to utilize in projects like this one to create new permeable paver streets. The base is a little bit unique. I've been asked what happens when the water goes down. Does it heave and frost during those conditions? The answer is no. We have 1-inch clean stone, which so has no fine material in it. So the spaces between the stones is where water can go. If it gets cold, the water can freeze and thaw into those spaces and doesn't heave the pavement. The water ideally will permeate down into the ground in the rock chamber, and if it can't hold all that water, there's a subdrain tile that will outlet it into the park behind us into 2 biocells that will be constructed next week. The cool thing about this also is that if we had let's say we had a water main break in the street here, rather than pulling out the pavement, jackhammering everything out, closing down the street for a week while we make the repair, put new pavement in, and wait for that concrete to cure, we could pull out the blocks that we need necessary, set them aside, create the repair, put the clean stone back in, drop the blocks back in, and you won't be able to tell where that patch was. Rapidly, it'll speed up the process of restoring the street and with little impact on the community. Typically, during street pavement, it could be anywhere from a 2-week to 30-day process for a street this size. This one went in much quicker than that. The nice thing also is that after you pave concrete street, you need to let it cure for a period of hours before you can drive on it. Once you lay these paver blocks down, you can drive on the same day. So we were able to lay these blocks, drive on the portion that we had laid, which gets us the street opened up much sooner than that, sooner than normal. I can't say enough good things about this project. I can't think of them all off the top of my head, unfortunately, right now. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And we can take a little bit of Q&A right now if you'd like to. And if not, we're going to, instead of having a traditional ribbon cutting, we're going to do a water bucket toss. It'll be our first one. So you might want to stand back a little bit. It'll be interesting to see how this works out. But we'll try that right away. If you have any questions afterwards, I'll be happy to answer them as well. So, Mr. Mayor, I'll let you have the first bucket.
Hey, Ray, I didn't see you.
You found it. All right.
So
On
you
3,
just pour it slowly.
we can pour it, dump it out there a little bit. 1, 2, 3. How about that?
Dissipates pretty
Wow,
quickly.
that's just
Wow, it's gone already. And that's what it's supposed to do.
That's what it's supposed to do. You won't have a bunch of flows going down the curb, around this corner, and down into the storm sewer.
Cool.
So,
Fantastic.
if you want, we could fire up the big boy, let you put a lot of water on it, show that to you guys, or do you want to ask any questions while it's quiet? It's going to make a little bit of noise if we do that.
It's pretty attractive, too. I mean, it's
Let's
nice
do Q&A without that first.
Okay.
All right. Well,
yeah.
thanks to Public Works Department. The rest of you guys are all working.